Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This episode is brought to you by Stars. Lisa Tadeo's best-selling book is about to become your favorite new show. Based on a true story, the new Stars original series 3 Women stars Shailene Woodley as Gia, a grieving and struggling writer who embarks on a cross-country road trip where she meets 3 women determined to radically change their lives. This one is not to be missed. Watch the season premiere of 3 Women, September 13th, only on Stars and the Stars app.
Whoa, Mohammed. Whoa, Mohammed. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making It Talk with me, James Holland, and with Al Murray. And this is a special episode because today we are celebrating the publication of Arnhem Black Tuesday. This is a break in our big Arnhem Market Garden series. And we're going to talk very exciting about your new book, Al, and many, many congratulations.
Thanks, Jim. Strictly speaking, I should reply with Well Mohammed because that's how they're identifying one another.
Go on,
Well Mohammed. Thanks, Jim. It is exciting, and it's that thing when the day is finally upon you, you know.
It really is, because I find it very, very hard to be enthusiastic about something that I'm not enthusiastic about. I'm not going to lie. And when you're reading a mate's book, it is a tense moment because you don't want to be thinking, oh, no, it was really good, Al. In that kind of tone of voice. You want to be saying, no. It really is absolutely freaking brilliant. And it is brilliant. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is there are obviously a lot of fence posts in the Second World War, and there are ink spots which are covered, let's say, more than other areas. You know, Dam Busters, D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Britain, all the things that I've written about or about to write about. But also, of course, Market Garden and Arnhem and paratroopers and people flicking V's at Germans and stuff. Yeah. But actually, there's not that much. Not really, actually. Because Leslie, what you want to do is just deconstruct that thought. Yeah. It was really interesting because I remember when I was first thinking about writing, I hadn't thought about writing the Dam Busters. And it was my great mate, friend of the show, Roland White, said to me, you should write Dam Busters. And I said, God, hasn't there been hundreds of books written about that? And he went, no. They have not as a narrative history. There hasn't been. And the only book that had been was, the original one, the Paul Brickhill one. But that's about 617 Squadron and the whole war. It's not just about the Dam's raid. There have been lots of books on Arnhem and lots of books on Market Garden, but they're either quite specialist or, let's face it, they're not particularly brilliantly written, or they're coming at it from a particular point. I mean, the actual sort of narrative histories are, I think, actually comparatively few and far between. Or there's something that, iconic like our Cornelius Ryan and A Bridge Too Far. And your worry was, which obviously sort of stands alone and was the first one. But I mean, in terms of the kind of the history, that was written in the late 60s, early 70s, and quite a lot of time and research has been carried out since then. And I remember you saying to me that your big concern was, I don't want to just write the same old stuff that everyone else is. What else is there to be said on this? And actually, I think what you've proved absolutely spectacularly well is there's a whole stack of new stuff to say about this stuff. Yeah. And particularly what you've worked out is from a narrative point of view. If you really want to get to grips of this and have a really good, compelling read, then don't bother with the Easter egg stuff because by that point it's a done deal. And what you're actually doing in 24 hours is looking at this with a kind of sort of forensic look on it. But boy, is it entertaining because there is so much going on. And because you're focusing on just 24 hours, that gives you the opportunity to look at it in the round and look at it to a level of detail which hasn't been done before. You're not just going to the parachute infantry battalions. You're going to the wider picture, the REME and the REMC and the Spanners Descending and
the gunners
the
and
different
and
component parts. And you see what a beast 1st Airborne Division is. So, I think it's absolutely revelatory. And you are definitely coming up with fresh and genuinely new perspectives. And it's a great read. And you have a completely unique style, which is very much your own, which is very much, I think, to your credit, because you're not consumed by academia. But you're coming at it with the forensic detail and research of the best academics. So, what's not to like?
Well, thanks, Jim. I mean, I really got no way of replying to that. It's extremely flattering because, you know what a fan I am of your work. And you're right, though. I mean, it is interesting because in a way, the fascinating thing about the airborne side of things is this is only 9 days, this battle. So there's only so much you can write about it, is that I think the way people have approached it. So you can only tell the story in the order it happens. Yeah. I really was desperate to set myself free of that story in order to try and look at things again. And as you say, by the time you get to Easterbrook, it's a done deal, which isn't to say that sort of hardship and the sacrifice and the tenacity.
And the drama. I mean, plenty of drama
and
still
the drama is any less. But
the narrative tension is gone, isn't it?
Yes, and it falls into a pattern. And in fact, the war, the war diaries fall into a pattern, but roughly say the same thing. Mortared in the morning. Unfortunately, the adjutant's been killed. It's sort of like that, rather than held off panzers and all this sort of thing. What I tried not to do is assume that people knew the outcome. But what I also wanted to do was put myself in the position of people who don't know the outcome. And that the hindsight they have with them is the hindsight of previous airborne operations rather than the one they're doing. Because that hindsight is informed so much of how they're going about Arnhem itself. That you can't write about this if you've not got Sicily in it. Because after all, 1st Airborne are in Sicily. More so than Normandy. Normandy's important, but Normandy isn't the key to why 1st Airborne is like it is. Because it's not them.
They're not in Normandy.
No, there's a trail of breadcrumbs as to things that might be about to be a problem. And, the post-Overlord report that 6th Airborne file has, is sort of prescient in lots of ways. But it's not about them. It's about different people. But I don't know. I mean, because this idea first came to me when you asked me to speak at Chalk. I mean, it must be 6-7 years ago. I said, I want to talk about Arnhem, but I only want to do one day because it seems like a compelling way of getting to the end of the day and saying what's going to happen tomorrow. To put yourself in the real moment, because we might know what's going to happen on the Wednesday and the Thursday and the Friday, the Saturday, the Sunday, and then following Monday. We might know all that, but they damn well don't. They've no idea
how it's going to pan out at all.
No, and they've no idea whether they're going to be relieved or not, and any of that stuff. So why not try and find that feeling in what's going on, but then also talk about fighting in built-up areas and the challenges that offers and firepower and medicine and spanners and all that sort of stuff. Because as you say, it's such a peculiar beast in Airborne Division because they've tried to create a normal one and then somehow transpose it into a new way of doing things. And that's the sort of part of the issue and the hybrid that 1st Airborne is. But also, I mean, I'm glad that you think, because, I did my history degree and with not much application, because, I got into doing stand-up in my first day at Teddy Hall, at St Edmund Hall, I met Stuart Lee and Richard Herring, who then sort of magnetically drew me into doing comedy. So I didn't much apply myself to my degree. I will admit I was nowhere near as studious as you. And certainly you've mentors from university who you still are still in touch with, whereas my parents have since made friends with Blair Worden, who's the Civil War historian and like an absolute don of the, I mean, literally a don, but like one of the people who made was making real ground in the 80s and 90s about the Civil War. And he was one of my tutors, and he basically, when my parents, because he's married a friend of theirs, when my parents met him, he couldn't believe I was doing history. He simply couldn't get his head around it because I was such a lousy, lazy student. It's like he's completely astonished that things might have turned out that way in the long run.
It's interesting. You're talking about your time at Teddy Hall and not doing a lot of history. So did you do a bit of Civil War when you were there?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, see, I did loads of 17th century. I did tons of 17th century. I did law, legal system in England before the Civil War. Then I did a bit of Civil War stuff, did loads on the Restoration, which is why I had such a penchant for Charles II. But, I digged around. I got Desmond.
Yeah, well, so did I, by really not doing any work at all. So, I mean, I always say to people who get annoyed with me, I say, well, a 2-2 from Oxford's probably a 2-1 from anywhere else, and then they think I'm an absolute arsehole. But I mean, I have since, Jonathan Healy's book, The Blazing World, which is that study of the whole of the 17th century from start to finish, which I read last year when I was doing the Crown Jewels, when I was playing King Charles II, is an amazing book, and I would recommend to anyone, even the most afflicted of the afflicted, because he says, start of the 17th century, there's no maps of England. No one can map. Those maps with sort of pictures of hills on and houses and, here be a bog. And by the end of the century, you have scientific mapping that's recognisable, that sort of attempts at ordnance survey, triangulation and things. And just you
well,
go
at the end
from...
of the 17th century, you've got St Paul's Cathedral, and you've got kind of rebuilt London, and you've got an age of science and arts and music and kind of, and Handel.
Exactly. And but there's no kind of indication at the start of that century that that's the way things are headed, And that's an amazing book. And we didn't do any Second World War. We did do... Well, no one does, but we did do the, Foreign Office telegrams and cabinet papers, 36, 39, the run-up to war, which ended with Chamberlain going, well, in that case, I've not had a recommendation for the Chancellor. We're going to, Hitler will go to war then. And it ended there. And as ever, that classic thing that we never got to find out who won.
But I mean, when you were at Oxford, I mean, so you had a bit of interest in the Second World because of Ingram, your father.
Yeah, we might, because of Dad, yeah.
And you knew about his para background and everything, obviously.
Yeah, and I'd done for my O-level history project.
Oh, yeah, you did a project.
I did a project about Arnhem, and it'll be somewhere in a loft, somewhere in a folder. And I went to Kew.
Wouldn't that be fun to revisit that?
Yeah,
and see what you got right and what you got wrong?
Well, I think it was just like beginning to end using the war diaries as the spine of the narrative thing, I think. Right. Because there's the...
Yes, because didn't you take yourself off to Kew?
Yeah, I did. I took myself to Kew, and I remember, I got a letter from my housemaster saying, could I go? Or my history teacher. I turned up and looked at the war diaries and leafed through them, and the war diaries are sort of... and there isn't one for the 10th Parachute Battalion. It doesn't exist because the battalion ceases to exist. So there isn't one. Yeah, exactly. They're destroyed. But, the 7th KOSB diary sort of becomes more and more sparse. It's a sort of 3-line entry for the last day because, that's the ratchet that they're under. But I mean, I remember going and doing that. So I went to Aldershot as well because the museum used to be in Aldershot and turned up. And I think the archivist, why is a 15-year-old boy appeared from nowhere, like on a Sunday when it's shut? And I sort of had a good look at everything and looked at the artefacts they had, which are now all in the Air Assault Museum in Duxford. And they had a magnificent diorama of the Arnhem Bridge. Yeah. Proper old museum, 80s museum stuff. But then again, I mean, when I was doing my history degree, the Second World War sort of wasn't on the map at all, wasn't regarded as a thing that was serious, something you didn't study. And then on and off, stayed engaged with it. And I remember the Middlebrook book came out in the mid-90s, I think, which was for the 50th.
But the Middlebrook, so Martin Middlebrook took the same sort of model as Lynn MacDonald, didn't you? I don't know which one came first, whether it was Martin or Lynn. But anyway, for those who aren't familiar with Martin Middlebrook or indeed Lynn MacDonald, Lynn MacDonald's First World War, he's not entirely, but because he did the Somme as well, didn't he?
Although he did a book about the Somme, yes, right, didn't he?
So what they do is it's huge tracts of... verbatim chunks of oral history. They're basically oral histories. He goes and talks to lots of people, interviews them, and then stitches them all together. And they massively have a value. They are incredibly entertaining, and you get that sense that, this is their voice and all the rest of it. So I think all that's incredibly effective. But that is what they are. They're not sort of casting huge, great historical judgment or anything. But it's quite easy to read those books and get captivated by your subject matter, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Although, I mean, the interesting thing with his is in researching Black Tuesday, I found there was a wave of stuff after Middlebrook in the 10 years that followed of people popping up and going, that didn't happen. Or that's not quite the right way around, or that's not the way.
Well,
not the way.
Therein lies the problem with oral history.
That's not the way I saw it, and there's a couple of things in particular which have sort of gone baked into the narrative, which don't look like they happened, or someone being extreme.
Unreliable witnesses, recollections may vary, and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and all that, and I actually think.
Well, it's not a question of recollections may vary. Recollections do
because
vary.
Do inevitably vary. And I actually think if because there is an instant in the book at the bridge in here where I say, well, that's what he says, but then the other lot say something else. And some other people from another point of view say the same thing. The same thing from a different angle. They all disagree about the gun they're firing on. Is it a howitzer? Is it a mortar? Is it they're all the different accounts and who deals with it. Are they even talking about the same instant? In the end, you just don't know, and you can't know. It's unknowable, a lot of it. Well, and I think
no, you don't know. But we were talking last week about my origin myth. And had I actually played cricket, and was there really a Spitfire over mid-wicket? And actually, I've told that story so many times.
The origin story I have about where did you come up with the idea of the pub landlord? And I've got this story about playing with Harry Hill in the Pleasance Bar at the Cabaret Bar, and I remember telling that story, and another comic going, "Oh, that's not really how I remember it," and thinking, "What?
Yeah,
like
right? Yeah.
Oh, no.
Well, there you are. So I think, and then, these guys are then telling the story, 40 years later or 30 years later or whatever.
Yeah. And to an interested witness as well, in particular, because that's the other thing. Here's a historian. It's your chance to get in the record. Your chance to, set the record straight and all that.
And the temptation to slightly big up.
Or run down the people you don't like.
I don't know. Well, I'd have been able to resist that.
But you want to hear their voices. I mean, the Middlebrook book is really very, very, very good. And people, it's the one people always say. I mean, it's quite funny. I have people say to me, have you read the Middlebrook? Yeah. And then, I'm sure you're aware that the South...
Okay, wild stab in the dark. What do you think?
Yeah, but, it's very sweet. Someone going, I'm sure you know that the South Stafford's had 2 Victoria Crosses at Arnhem. And you're like, I'm sure I know that, yes.
I know, it's funny when people they say, do you know this? And before you've answered, you're being told it. And you think, I've just spent 18 months studying this subject. I mean, don't start talking to me about it.
But the other day, I put a thing up saying I just bought this book at the Hartenstein and then I met the guy's nephew, right? And someone goes, wow, amazing. And then someone 2 tweets down from that chain goes, have you ever been to the Hartenstein Museum?
Didn't happen.
Yes.
No, that's really funny. So anyway, so just to get back to your kind of you in the Second World War. So you're watching war movies with your dad, with Ingram. Yeah. You're getting into it. You're aware totally of that. You've had this little sort of mini obsession when you're 15. Then presumably you go off to university.
And I'll be honest, the sort of time from uni and then well into my late 20s was very much eyes down on being a comic and trying to work that out and figure all that out. And
so that was your kind of interregnum. That was where you cast the Second World War to one side, and you didn't need it in your life.
But I also did pick up the Middlebrook when it came out. The cover of that is really great.
So I've got the Penguin one with the kind of white cover, the orange spine, and the kind of...
And the badges on it.
Is that the one you're talking about?
The flashes. It's really good. It's a great cover. And then I remember reading The Sharp End by Joel Ellis, which I picked up in a bookshop sort of by accident, which is a classic.
Pimlico did that as a paperback.
It's such a...
In fact, that's a hardback paperback.
That's the edition.
It's the picture of there's the guys in sort of Valkyrie in the...
That's
Canadians
right.
in the...
That's right. And then...
In the water.
And then the Richard Overy, Why the Allies Won. Because I thought, I know how I'm going to put to bed my interest in the Second World War. I'll read a book by an eminent historian that will definitively explain it to me.
Okay.
And it just set me off.
So how old do you think you were, though? Had you hit 30 at this point?
Around just before I was 30. And then 20 years ago, so then I'm into it. I'm reading Carlo Destin. I'm reading Max Hastings. I'm reading a lot of Normandy stuff. Because Northwest Europe. And I remember reading the... no, not quite. And the Bungay Battle of Britain book, the Alamein stuff, all this sort of thing. A book about Malta by someone called James Holland was in the mix. Yeah. And then I did Road to Berlin in 2004. For Discovery, where basically they had Rory.
But how did they get you? They must have known that you were into this.
I was on the Frank Skinner show. On Frank Skinner's talk show. And Frank and I go way back because I opened for him in 1991 when he was touring. And basically he'd go, Al, you know about history.
Tell me about Second World War.
Tell me about... so we go to Bury St... Well, we go to Bury St Edmunds or whatever. And he'd go, why is it called that? What are these ruins here? What's the monastery? So I'd say, well, it's Dissolution of the Monasteries, Frank. And it all comes about because of X, Y, Z. And you can regard it as sort of proto-privatization. It's the end of the power of the church and, and a redistribution of property into the land. The landed classes takes the massive adjustment. And you get the Pilgrimage of Grace and, Geoffrey Elton's stuff about that, and he loved it. But he'd also, if we were going to Lincolnshire, go, well, tell me about the Dam Busters, Al. I then go on his talk show and he said, one of the things he used to love about touring with me is we talk about history, particularly the Second World War. And whoever the commissioner was at Discovery, who commissioned that series, was watching that and put in the call in the morning and said, would Al like to drive from Normandy to Berlin in a Jeep?
And you said, yes, I would.
And I said, yes, I would. Then we went for lunch. Yes, I definitely would. And that was that. And that was when I went on all these amazing adventures and it was Lion TV.
Yeah.
Amazing producer called Ludo Graham who put it all together.
Legendary production house, by the way.
Yeah,
also did all the historic farm series.
Brilliant.
Victorian Farm, Edwardian Farm.
Yeah, and brilliant people. And I remember the first piece to camera I did was on the Borgibu Ridge with a guy from Seventh Armoured.
Oh, yeah. You've told me this story. This is great.
That's right. They go, what are you going to do? And I said, I've got an idea for what this piece to camera will be. So don't worry. I know what I'm going to say, because there's a script. And you go, no, actually, I know what I'm going to say. And I remember the first was me saying, battlefields don't often announce themselves. You take one look at somewhere and you think, well, how does this explain what happened here? But take a look at this stretch of ground. And you know, like a classic walk in the ground moment. Stand on the top of the Borgy Boo Ridge. You look down, there's a narrow gauge railway. There's all of that down to Columbell. And you think, cool, crikey, it's a prospect coming up here if the Germans are dug in, particularly with 88s or whatever they've got, or Pack 75s or whatever,
They had 88s. They had 88s.
Tigers and all, whatever. But whatever. That's a hell of a prospect. And we had this old boy, so we do the piece to camera. And the other thing is, we're in Normandy, so a staff ride turned up while we were trying to film. And so a whole coach comes up and disgorges, and it's all blokes in red trousers. And
with their sleeves rolled up above their elbows.
Exactly, and someone going, right, we're at the Borgy Boo Ridge. It is often said that, of course, the Soviets provided the blood, the Americans provided the material, and the British provided the time. But here we are at a place where the British provided the blood in the victory in the Second World War. And they're all going, rah, 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 lovely, right? And anyway, so you then have to wait for them to leave the staff ride. You can't film. They're gone, and we've got this old boy, and he stands there and he goes, in the interview, because they always used to do it in the interview because they were desperate to get it into while the camera was rolling. He went, standing up here, I know the likes of Max Hastings says we was useless, so we were no fucking good, but I don't know how we could, if we were no good, how did we get up here in the first place? We got, and you think, and my producer's going, no, I don't want that. Don't want that.
And you're going, no, I do want that.
I know we do want that. But, because I remember I took Carlo Desto with me on that trip, Your Decision in Normandy, which is a big, fat book, a great big and heavily thumbed volume of my dad's. And I remember just thinking, well, this doesn't square with how things turned out, though, does it? It can't. So for that episode, I drove around in Sherman with Ken Tout in the place in Norfolk. For the landing, the D-Day one, we went out to Devon, and I went in a landing craft for the Royal Marine Commandos, who were really funny with me because I did a piece to camera and I go, soldiers don't like getting wet, because then they're in their wet clothes the rest of the day. And at the end of it, I said, is that about right? They said, we don't know about soldiers, mate. We're Marines.
Fantastic.
Like, God, stay in character. This is beautiful stuff. And then, and so we, for one episode, for the Berlin episode, they rigged up a special effect, a Visifex flamethrower and a Panzerfaust, which was made of pot plants. You could get the same shape out of plastic pot plants for the warhead of a Panzerfaust. And a T-34. And then, but the grand climax was the last day of filming was parachuting into Arnhem, onto the Ginkle Heath. And it was the last day of filming because basically, what if he breaks his neck? So we had to do it right at the end. And we went to a place called Texel on the north coast of Holland, where in fact it was the last German holdout until something like the 12th. There was a battle there. And we were trained.
I'm pretty sure that's where Les Munro was flying over on his way to the dams when he got hit by flak.
It probably was. Yeah. And the people from Pathfinder who did the jump were really brilliant. And we had 2 days training, and I was meant to get a jump from this sort of, like a sky van thing. And the weather went wrong. So I never got my practice jumps. So come the Sunday, when we were doing the commemorative jump, that was my first jump. And I was very fortunate because Steve Lammonby was the vehicles guy, who's a legendary TV and movies vehicles guy. He'd been in the Artist Rifles in the 70s, TASAS. Yeah. So he had me jumping down the stairwell, practicing my parachute landing falls. Feet knees together, Al. Down you go. And then I did the jump and landed on my heels, on my face, on my bum. And then from then on, I was like, right, I'm back into the Second World War. I'm into this. And it became the thing I read about the most and really like.
God for that.
That. Yeah, I know. But always with the sort of Arnhem. I mean, obviously our regular listeners know this, but that was the thing running through the Stick of Rock as the sort of singularity.
That Stick of Rock, let's just pause that for, let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, we'll talk some more. Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk with me, James Holland, with Al Murray, and we're talking about Al's new book, Arnhem Black Tuesday, out in all good bookshops and bad. And
you can buy it from the bad ones too. It's fine.
That's my point. And but we were talking about the stick of rock, the writing down the middle of the stick of rock, which has very much been Arnhem particularly rather than Market Garden, I guess.
Yeah.
It's the Red Berets, isn't it? It's the British Airborne Forces. And that's because your dad was in the parachute regiment. Well, no, he was in the Royal Engineers.
Cool, that was close. Yes, he was Airborne Engineers. Airborne Engineers. That's right. Did some stuff in yes, he did Suez when he was a regular sapper, and then he sort of fell into their orbit when he was in Cyprus, and then went to Aden with 131 Independent Parachute Squadron, as they were at the time. Well, I can't remember if they were, because they keep being reorganised. There's no point giving anything a name in the British Army from 50s through to the 80s, because everything keeps being reorganised, or till now, because everything constantly is reorganised and rebadged. They're commandos now, 131.
We've all got our sort of special squadrons, favourite regiments, whatever. I mean, it's airborne, isn't it? Yeah. That's the reason. And I think, there are photographs of me when I'm 3 in a red beret, I pinched off my dad. So not that I ever imagined for one second it was a thing I was ever going to do, because of, the sort of standard reasons like cowardice and an aversion to hardcore exercise. So listen, has Ingram had a look at it yet?
Yes, he has. And I was on holiday. I was on holiday with him the week before last.
And does he keep going on paragraph 2, page 172, Alistair?
We haven't got to that stage of the proceedings yet, but he did say the chat about the artillery is particularly fascinating. So I think,
okay.
and I think he's enjoyed it. My mother said that he'd enjoyed it and everything. But I mean, I thought he might write a book about this, because he has written quite a lot of regimental level publication.
Well, he did one about your grandfather, didn't he?
Exactly, and he's done it. And Bugle and Sabre, which was the Ox and Bucks and Green Jackets magazine. He was writing for that pretty regularly. But
I got one of those battlefield guides to Hazebrouck and Kassel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago. I remember saying to him, "Why don't you write a book about Arnhem? Because you know all about it." And he did say, "No, there's nothing more to be said." But the truth is, there's loads has happened actually in the scholarship, and loads has happened. There were 3 resources I used an awful lot that were really brilliant to get my hands on. One is the Cornelius Ryan Archive. Yes. And the brilliant thing about the Cornelius Ryan Archive is, first of all, the way he conducts it. So his publisher would send out a questionnaire. Dear sir, I have reason to believe you were involved in the Battle of Arnhem.
He also employed loads and loads of researchers.
Yeah, exactly. So there's English researchers, British researchers writing to people. And it's hundreds of pages of this stuff. All of this research was done before A Bridge Too Far. So it's not coloured by A Bridge Too Far. The research for A Bridge Too Far is clean of the book and of the film, and the way that's skewed or turned or coloured the narrative. And so you can read the great long submissions by people, by Sheriff Thompson, by Padre Pear, by all sorts of people, and privates and corporals and all sorts of people. You can read those submissions before the story gets set in stone. And that, I think, is really, really interesting, because everything since then has been, as we were saying earlier on, there's been a lot of record being set straight since then. And so that's quite good. The other thing to really bear in mind is that the army side of the story has been told over and over again, but the RAF side side of the story has very much been pushed to one side, or in fact, the RAF's efforts, apart from the supply run, have been sort of denigrated, and issue of where the landing zones and all that happened has been very much like the blame has been handed onto the air side of things rather than the army side being involved in it. And that's, there's been some interesting scholarship since that suggests otherwise, or that suggests it's much more complicated than that. Seb Ritchie's work on Arnhem has been really brilliant, and the stuff about close air support and all that sort of stuff. So there's the Ryan stuff. There's the Pegasus Archive, which is really good because it's brilliant for personal detail, citations, all collated together. And then paradata.org, which is a website that's like basically everyone in Airborne Forces ever website, and some battle diaries and some after post-match reports and all this sort of stuff. And that's really, really good, because that's all driven, Paradata is sort of driven by people sending stuff in and submitting their family stories and submitting their photos and all that sort of stuff. Paradata is really interesting because it's ongoing, it's sort of incomplete, probably never will be complete, but has the ambition to try and tell everybody's story top to bottom. And that's pretty cool, I think. Yeah. As a resource.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Pegasus Archive has the war diaries in absolutely comprehensive form. And in fact, if you pay him, he'll send you a USB with the photocopies of absolute scans of everything, which is like a hell of a thing to have to scroll through. And they were the three things I went to. And what's really great is that you do have some accounts, from just after the war, but then you do have other people's recollections. There's a lot of letters to and fro between people about things and private accounts in private papers that are now coming through as families discover them and put them into the public domain. But then on top of that, knowing people like Keith Brigstock, which is a direct result of the podcast, messaging Keith and saying, could you tell me, what are the gun drills for the 75mm howitzer?
Yeah.
And
he knows.
And he sends you the manual. He sends you the stuff. And having access to people like that who know and who can tell you rate of fire on paper, but this is probably what they're doing. And the advantage of this kind of ammunition, of course, is that it's lighter, so you can take more of it and all that sort of thing. And one of the things I really sort of became interested in is this question with the gliders of opportunity cost, that every decision you make about loading a glider means you can't make another decision about loading a glider, and that everything you do changes everything else you do. And that then you get into the sheer complexity of this way of doing things. And then obviously that leads to some of the decision making where they go, yeah, that's all right. We'll use the orders from last week. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Which then leads to things further downstream, as the events play out. But I mean, the resources, and this is online. This is before you buy all the books, go through all the books. There's the Arnhem Fellowship, which is, an online thing, and they're amazing. That's lots of private papers and all these sort of essentially privately published books, like From Delhi to Arnhem, which is about 156 Battalion, Arnhem, Their Final Battle, which is about the 11th Battalion, with Spanners Descending, which is the book about the Remy, and you get into all the slender volumes that offer you a load of texture and colour.
But also they're slender volumes that no one's bothered to kind of look at in a narrative history, just because you're doing the whole battle, you haven't got time, you just want to cut to the chase and go straight to
and
the
a lot of them are published
bit.
only in the last 15 years. So that's the other thing. Since
it's like that huge book on sort of Royal Artillery in Normandy, for example. I mean, that's only came out sort of 5 years ago or something. It's absolutely huge and exhaustive, and but thank God that someone else has done the work for you. I mean, and on a book like that, I mean, it's just brilliant.
Exactly. Honestly compare one set of circumstances with another, because there it is. Someone's gone through and particularly the numbers, and looking at the numbers. And when we were walking the ground in Normandy, when you get into the logistical side of it, start thinking about that and start thinking about what artillery barrage like that actually mean. It means the logistical effort, again, opportunity cost, the decision to supply that, the effort to supply, all that is wildly important and interesting. Arnhem histories or airborne history go, airborne soldiers are, of course, lightly armed, and it's left at a sentence. And I think, well, how lightly armed? What do you mean by that? How does that affect things? What does that really mean? What?
They've got pack howitzers, they've got mortars. But I suppose the thing is with an airborne operation, if you're at the front, you've got a supply line. So you've got your mortars there. You might, or you're on your 25-pounder battery. They've got trucks full of ammo.
Yeah.
And they're heaving their trucks back, the ammo back and forth. When you're an airborne division, you've got a finite amount. Yeah. And so every time you fire a mortar, that's a mortar gone.
Yeah. Well,
so you've got to make it count in a way that you can't. And the whole, and I think for one of the really, really interesting points you make in the book, which I've just never seen written before at all, the whole Allied way of war is about firepower, and it's about profligacy. Yeah. It's about just shooting vast amounts of shells, whether they be mortar shells or whether they be howitzer shells or whether they be anti-tank rounds. It is about firing ordnance. That's what the whole structure of the British effort, and indeed the American effort, is geared towards. So suddenly you're creating these divisions which aren't doing that.
They can't win the way you're winning.
But also they're commanded by people who are used to that way of doing things, like Urquhart or frankly, Lafbury or whoever or Hackett. These are people who've not been kind of, they're not like Jim Gavin, who has been a pioneer of airborne and has been airborne for the entire duration of the Second World War. That is not the case of these guys.
Yeah, yes. Well, Lafbury's been there from the start, but he's been a recruitment guy and he's been a mobilizer.
All right, but Hackett isn't. Hackett's been in tanks, hasn't he? So not Lafbury, but Hackett. But And then you make the very good point that 80% of casualties are in the Second World War are mortars and artillery, and only 10% of casualties are by bullets, and yet 80% of what the airborne have got is bullets.
Yes, by the book focuses in there, but the parachute battalion's mortars run out of ammunition within the one encounter they're in. I mean, the other thing I was really trying to do, and it's the thing that sometimes you get in history books, and I think it's the thing you're brilliant at, is that feeling that everyone is basically living on their nerves. Everyone's living on the edge of tomorrow. They don't know if they're going to live or die every time the shooting starts, and the whole thing is essentially completely unpredictable. Or the thing that's predictable is that you will probably be killed or injured, but the unpredictable part is how. You've no idea how that might happen. You've no grip on how or when that could happen to you. It's probably going to. Knowing anything beyond that is completely out of your hands.
Do you lose a leg? Do you get slightly grazed? Do you get concussed? Yeah. Do you have your head blown off? Are you completely blown to bits? Or do you have a long lingering death of your guts trailing everywhere? I mean, it's just totally in the lap of the dog. God.
Exactly. Or you found without a mark on you. The men found near the bridge without a mark on them. It looked like they're having a conversation and they're dead. I think you're really brilliant now. And the thing I really wanted to try and do, and I mean, obviously Bill, who's the publisher we share, and I had the conversation about the end of the book because I wanted the book to end with what will happen tomorrow. And he kind of said, look, I know I like it too, but you're just going to have to put a bit more. It's going to have to be a bit more after that. At the end is the culture of commemoration in Arnhem, which is a thing we saw last week when we were there walking the ground. Because after all, this book is part of also, it's remembering. And so you're part of that continuum of the culture of how the battle's remembered. And I think the way they do it in Arnhem is, and Oosterbeek and Renkum and Wolfheiser and all those places around
it's
it.
Incredibly touching, isn't it? And all the flags and all the rest of it. But just go back to your book. I mean, I think one of the things that you convey better than anyone who's written about this subject before is the total mayhem and chaos and disconnect and discordant nature of it, and units scattered and unknowing of what's going on, and just the mayhem. So vivid. It's so brilliantly done. I mean, it's a terrific achievement. It's
Thanks,
a proper work of history, and it's a really, really compelling read. I mean, really compelling read. I can't imagine why anyone who's been following us for the last 5 years wouldn't go out and get it, because, well, why wouldn't they? I mean, I'm being quite serious, because it's just so kind of gripping, compelling, easy to read, full of lots of details, lots of DNKTs, did not know that.
But the thing is the other thing I was trying to do is actually create a sort of style for how I might write history. Yeah. Because Command, the last book, was basically was a series of essays, really, and they linked and they ran onto each other and they had points to make, and also I think were different. Monty and venereal disease, Patton and what is Patton's rhetoric, why we've got Percy Hobart the wrong way round, and all that, and then people you've never heard of, and I thought, I'm coming to a way of doing this here, but the sort of stylistic things I've done in this with the bridge, the town, the village, the woods. It's very deliberate, and I think whatever I do next, there'll be an echo of that again. There'll be, the ship, the plane, because I just sort of think
it's your way.
It's a nice way to hook people in, and it feels different. And I've often read history books where you think, I'm just not going to be able to retain these street names. I'm just not going to be able to retain these names of places. I can't quite do it. And there's a Norman Davis wrote a book about the Warsaw Uprising quite a while ago, where he gave everyone nicknames, because he writes in the preface, he goes, look, I know you can't cope with the Polish names. I know you can't do it. I know you Brits, you look at them and you glaze over and you can't handle them.
And he's right, isn't he?
He's right, I think, to an extent. And so he nicknamed people the Bear, and there's an element of that in that approach of breaking it into places, and also to push the narrative along. What's going on in the town rather than on the Utrechtsweg.
Many congratulations. It's a big thing. It's a big thing writing a book, and it's a big thing to have a book. And I should just say one last thing I'm going to say about the book is also it is beautifully produced.
Yeah.
You and I are lucky enough to have Phil Lord who's in charge of this.
But I've got map envy for some of your maps, though. The maps that you've got are of another level.
Yeah. But anyway, well, listen. Cheers, Al. many congratulations. Everyone should rush out and buy it.
I agree.
On Black Tuesday in all good bookshops now. And thank you all very much for listening, and see you
with our next episode of Market Garden. Yeah.
With our next episode of Arnhem episode number 4.
Thanks, everyone. Cheerio. Arnhem, Black Tuesday, 24 hours in the Battle of Arnhem. From me, Al Murray. Now, if you're familiar with me, and we have ways of making you talk, you know I do everything I can to crowbar the Battle of Arnhem into every conversation. Well, here it is, the full crowbar. Arnhem, Black Tuesday, out now in hardback, ebook and audio.